Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm going to facilitate a conversation today with my good friend Peter Scalzo, who is our host. And today we have a special guest. One of our favorite things is to hear about other people's lives and stories. And so Peter's invited one of his good friends. And so I'm going to kick it over to him to do the invite. And we're going to have a great conversation today, just hearing about somebody else's story on their cancer journey.
Thanks, Sean. I am so excited to have my good friend Katharin here today. And so Katharin and I share a lot in common with raising our kids together and all that stuff, but she is also a recovery participant. In fact, she is the Connecticut State Rep for the recovery program that we are all involved in. And Katharin recently went through a cancer journey. And so I thought, what an ideal person to come in and comment about her diagnoses, what happened in her cancer journey, and how recovery and some of the other tools really had an impact on her life. So Katharin, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Well, thank you, Peter. I feel really honored to be part of this, to be your first interviewee, and to be your first woman interviewee. So really grateful to be able to share my story because by sharing, it's an encouragement to me to remember to look back and to be looking down into what this has meant to me, what it's been like, and to be able to share that with people.
Katharin, I'm interested because this podcast is called Cancer and Peace, and you've gone through a longer journey. I've watched from a little bit of a distance, and I've heard quite a bit of things just when Peter and I have been talking about things a little bit. But can you start back at the beginning when you just first heard your diagnosis and walk us into, how this all transpired? What were your thoughts and feelings, and up through just a little bit of the journey? And I'm sure we're gonna have lots of questions, but I'd love to hear a little bit of that story and how it came about and what you felt like.
Yeah. So in the beginning of 2021, my daughter had just had our first grandchild, my granddaughter, in February of 2021. We were still in the midst of COVID, and so that was challenging to be a grandparent when I had to wear a mask and keeping the distancing and all that kind of thing. And but I started to notice over the next couple of months that I was losing weight without really trying, but I thought that was great. I really liked being thinner. And that then I noticed that there was sort of a bulge in my abdomen. And being sort of really good at denial, I just kind of thought, well, maybe, I don't know, whatever. I just kind of put it aside because I'm really good at that. And I was focused on my granddaughter and my daughter and helping out because they lived not that far away from us. And but then I finally asked a friend of mine that we've been in a prayer group together for many years, and she's a physical therapist. I asked her to feel that lump and see, suggest what I might do, who I might see. And her eyes kind of got wide. And she said, I think you ought to go see your OBGYN. And I didn't even know my body well enough to know that was probably where my ovaries were, or my female stuff. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So I did, and they had an ultrasound, and it showed a fibroid, a very large fibroid. They thought, but possibly some other things going on there. And my gynecologist said this might be more complicated than it looks, than just having a complete hysterectomy, which is what they would do. And I'm so grateful that I already knew Peter. And so that my OBGYN said, find an oncologist that you trust, and go from there. And I immediately knew where I wanted to go, and that was to MSK. And at this point, it might not be cancer. It just might be a big old fibroid that has to be taken out, and and all that stuff. So went to MSK for a consult.
Tell us what MSK is.
Oh, sorry, Memorial Sloan Kettering.
All right, thanks.
We live in the Northeast, and people variously call it Sloan and everything, but Fortunately, they have a fairly new facility in Westchester, so that was about 45 minutes from where I lived at the time in Danbury.
So you went to see the Memorial Sloan Kettering oncologist.
And you went with me.
For that first time, okay.
Peter went with me, and didn't you? I think you did. And because they had looked at the scan, the ultrasound,
Okay.
and they decided to schedule a surgery for me.
Okay.
And that surgery was going to be down in Manhattan at Memorial Hospital, which is what they run.
So when did you find out you actually had cancer?
After the surgery.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Because they were still telling me, and they try to kind of like ease your fears and stuff. And whereas I really like to know the truth, but so I went down on a Monday morning. My husband took me down to Manhattan on a Monday morning. My husband does not like driving in the city. So we had to be there at like 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever. We did that, and then he, dropped me off, and I went in. And 7.5 hours of surgery. And he was actually not able to see me because by the time, this was, remember, 21, we're still in COVID. And he was not able to, by the time the doctors got back to him, because it had been a complicated surgery. So by the time the doctors got back to him, visiting hours were over. So he had to drive back to Connecticut alone, not knowing really anything how I was.
So what did the surgeons find? Can you share that?
Yes, the reason that the surgery, which should have probably been a 3.5-hour surgery for a full, they call it a ovectomy or whatever it's called, full hysterectomy, they had found that it had metastasized to the area around there was an ovarian, a tumor in the ovary that had been hidden by this fibroid that was sort of hiding behind this fibroid. So it was really the fibroid that was really kind of not related to the tumor, as far as I understand. And I wouldn't have found that tumor in my ovary if it hadn't been for that fibroid. That's my understanding. Anyway, they had, in the process of looking around in there, because they don't really know what they're going to find when they go in, there were a couple of areas right outside that region where it had metastasized. So they had to call in a specialist, what was it? A bile duct specialist surgeon to come in and very carefully get those cells out, which required a specialist. Who knew there was a bile duct specialist in that? But anyway,
Not me.
They know. That's why I was very grateful to be at Memorial, because if I'd had the surgery done locally, they wouldn't have had that available. So when I woke up from the surgery, and actually the next morning, because it was, I was pretty out of it. I had a very long abdominal scar opening and tubes everywhere. And one of the surgeons who had been on that team came in to see me. And I still didn't know at this point whether it was cancer or not. And he came in to see me, and he said, well, this is a cancer that it responds very well to chemotherapy.
So that's how you were told.
That's how I was told. And I didn't see
shocked.
my actual oncologist, my surgeon, for another 4 days. I was in the hospital for 6 days. And I was down in Manhattan. I had asked Tony not to come down because he hated driving in the city so much, and it was so stressful for him. And I just thought, I'm okay here. I'm really good at being by myself. I had my music, but I really underestimated how powerful that news had been to me. I'm like I said, I'm really good at denial. And that was just a really huge blow, and I was pretty much dealing with it by myself. I made the mistake, I considered it a mistake later, that I was talking to my son, and he was 25 at the time, and I said, I told him, I have cancer.
Mm.
Well, he was ready to come down. He was also in Connecticut. He was just ready to come right down to the city. He didn't care, whatever. But I just said no. He was in a situation where he couldn't come by himself, so he would have had to come with my husband. And I just said, no, that's okay. I'm okay. I look back, I regret that I didn't let him come down, and that I didn't have the family come down.
That's a big share. I love what you just shared there, and I hear the pain a bit in just your journey right there. Something that was sticking out, I was listening to what you said a second ago, and you talked about seeing, this bulge, and you were kind of used the word, and we've done recovery work together 3 times, and I've heard a bit of your larger testimony, and you just said, hey, I minimized this. And so for our listeners, I was just thinking about how important what you're sharing right now is, as you shared, minimizing, a tumor, this bulge growing inside of you, how that could have been life-threatening, like how big this particular type of, we use the term character defect, and I'm not trying to attack you when I say that.
Of course.
With that kind of thing in your character where you minimize things that are happening in your body or in your life, the pain of that. And then you went on to say that the doctors were minimizing it to you. They weren't giving you the full scope too as you were going along. It's like they kind of just lightly step you along. And so this seems like an important part of your journey, is seeing that in yourself and the fact that you minimize then the pain. And so I'm curious, in the sense of, now that you've been back from that a little while, have you found a level of healing in that? Where has it changed the way you think and act and feel about situations? Or what would you tell somebody who's listening to this podcast now, hey, about your own journey and how you find healing? Because you had to learn that about yourself to be able to even know that.
Yeah, I mean, it does take some time away from it to realize what it was. And as we often say in recovery, I didn't know how sick I was until I got better. And even looking back on it now, reliving it is really healthy for me, because I have not cried. Tears were coming to my eyes. I haven't cried over my cancer journey. There were so many other things going on in my family and my own health and my own, like you said, I minimize because I'm so focused on other people. And that is the story of my life. That's been happening since I was a child. And I could go into why that is, but I can just say that that self-care is so hard. I think it's just one of the hardest things for anybody, including women, including mothers, wives, because so much depends on us. And so, but also, you take my childhood, which really, my emotions were minimized from the get-go. I wasn't allowed to have emotions. I was the youngest of 4. It was very important to the other people in my family that we not address emotions, because nobody could handle it. And so I was the quote-unquote emotional one in my family until probably I was 4 years old. I realized that I wasn't going to get what I needed. I wasn't going to get anywhere. So I guess I really better just stuff it, not recognize it. And so I would say to someone who is on this journey, you really can't serve anybody else until you serve yourself, until you take care of yourself. It's the first lesson in first aid. Grab that oxygen tank before you try to help somebody else. And that's what this whole healing journey of recovery, which actually I really don't like. I want to use the word discipleship. It's discipleship. It's learning who I am in Christ, and not all those things that I grew up with, all the negative things that I believed about myself, and the healing that was in that. Discipleship is self-care, because that's what Jesus wants to do. Is he really wants to come alongside of us and into us to help us be who he meant for us to be from the very beginning. He chose me from the beginning of time to really be able to be a witness to him.
Katharin, thanks for sharing that. We didn't introduce your spiritual journey yet into this, so you just did a bit of it then. I want to go back to when you were by yourself and you discovered that it was cancer and you were in the hospital. Can you tell us a little bit about what was going on inside of you emotionally and what role spirituality played in that time?
Well, I realized that I was alone. And, I know your story, and you've been there many times in a hospital room. And I would call that the dark night of the soul. And so that was, it was such a mix, because I knew God, I had praised the Lord that I had been in recovery. Praise the Lord that I had done so much healing work to that point, because my journey in cancer would have looked very different if I hadn't been involved in this healing work, internal work with Jesus and with other people. So I played music. I mean, just having to physically recover from that surgery was a huge job. My belly was bloated. I was in pain. I was uncomfortable, but I recovered fairly quickly. I mean, did really well, because fortunately I was otherwise healthy. The other thing I need to say is that having cancer was not a huge shock to me, in the sense that both of my parents had died of cancer in their mid-70s, and I was 70 at the time. And my father had actually had cancer when he was 63 years old. And this was a long time ago, before they had the kind of treatments that they have now. But my mother had a brain tumor, and so I wasn't all that surprised. It was a little sooner than I expected, but everyone in my family has gotten cancer. All my aunts, my grandparents died of cancer as well. So there's that aspect that I wasn't surprised. But yes, it was a shock, but I kind of had time to process it in that time in the hospital.
What, Katharin, what did that look like to process it? Yeah.
Well, it was really just listening. I didn't have the strength to write. I didn't write a journal. I've been in the hospital previously I'd had 2 different hip replacements. So I kind of knew what I needed in order to, I had my music, I had my devotionals. Couldn't even really read that much. And it was a big deal for me to just try to figure out what I was going to eat. And they weren't very helpful to me in that. Having had all this abdominal surgery, you'd think they would have, but that was one area that I think they could do better. So I was just kind of struggling, with that. And you had to order food, and it was COVID, so it took hours to get your food and things like that. So just that, and then of course they make you get up and walk and do things. But I'm a very self-sufficient person, so I realized how I was trying to make things easier on the nurses. So I would take myself to the bathroom and stuff. But that's part of my codependency. But having that task to do was a challenge, and I was sort of felt it was a challenge. But so I think that you asked me what did it look like, what did it feel like. It was just, it was, it was a blessing and a curse. I was just processing, okay, I'm pretty pragmatic. I mean, okay, it's cancer. Um, After a few days, I'm just like, okay, then we're just going to do what we got to do. And, I rebound pretty quickly, I would say. Maybe it was still some denial, but
When did you really first start to grieve that journey? Because there's a sense of loss of, something changes. I know Peter talks about the identity change. I'm now a cancer patient. And that
the what
means
change? I'm sorry.
Identity.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
that you move, into this cancer patient role, and there's a loss. There's something inside of you changes, but there's also a loss. You have time. You recognize in some point that all these treatments are coming, that there's a lot of pain and suffering down the road, and the realization of this also could kill me. This is something it could turn into something serious enough to take my life. That sense of grieving and loss, did that happen, and how or when or what was your experience in that space?
You know, I had my granddaughter to as a sort of a distraction. I'm really grateful for that because I have pictures of me sitting in my recliner, with this big bulging belly, and then this infant sitting next to me. And I called her my nurse because, babies are so life-giving, just being in their presence. And so that summer, so I had surgery at the end of June, beginning of July. I was out of the hospital. We started scheduling, well, it was about another 6 weeks. I wanted it to be about 6 weeks out. So, first of all, I wasn't able to swim in our swimming pool. Doggone it. We wait all winter and, I wasn't able to do that. But, I was really grateful to be able to be home. And, I don't work outside the home. I volunteer a lot. I still had things that I could do on my computer and stuff. And so my job that summer was to get better, to recover from that, so that I could start my chemo in August. The same time, my husband went away for a couple of weeks. He grew up in another country, and he went to visit his family because he needed to. His family are elderly. His parents are elderly, and I just remember that I had to start chemo before he came back, driving down to Westchester, New York, and but I had family around. I had my daughter. I had my son-in-law, who's very helpful, and my forever family in Celebrate Recovery really came along. You went with me to my oncologist, to see my oncologist when we talked about the chemo. You were able to advocate for me in ways that I couldn't. You, Peter, were able to advocate for me in ways that I didn't know, and you helped me understand the medical reports. And you see the word metastasized because that was after the surgery, and a few little while after, where I read the report. It's just like metastatic cancer. That means. So, I don't. I was able to just take one day at a time with it, and with so much support around me. And you already had your cancer support group going, and I participated in that, which by Zoom, I think. I don't think I ever met in person. Maybe once at
During the
Walnut Hill.
pandemic, it was Zoom only, and it still
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
yeah. But still, just having people who, uh, Christ, Christ followers who kind of had been through it as well is so important. And also, a friend of mine had put me in touch with someone down in Maryland who ran an ovarian cancer support group, and she was very helpful to me in making decisions about different things. And so, and there's it's ovarian.org, I think, there's a wonderful organization. And so they did determine it was stage 3 because it had metastasized a little bit. And I got to meet some long-term ovarian cancer survivors. That gave me a lot of hope.
So, Katharin, the chemo, how long did the chemotherapy last for?
So I had 6 chemo treatments.
Okay.
It started in August, and they were every 3 weeks, and they went to November, the end of November. So the first time, a friend of mine drove me, and yeah, I think it was Karen, yeah, it's pretty daunting to go into those, but Sloan has just this incredible facility where you get your own room. So I used to call it my spa. I would just go and they wonderful nurses, and they kind of set you up with everything, and then you sit there. I'm really good at just sitting and thinking and listening to music. I'd play music in there, and nurses would play. So it's so relaxing in here. I play piano music and stuff, relaxing music. I did, after the first treatment, the hardest part, I'll say that besides the surgery and recovering from that, I was very fortunate. I did not get nausea. I did not, have some of the other side effects, but I did immediately started getting neuropathic pain. And I had to look it up over the weekend to know what it was, because they had really not told me that there was a good chance of that. I hadn't heard about that. I had gone to the naturopaths and said, give me something for nausea, give me something for, but that first weekend after my first treatment was really rough. I couldn't sleep. I was having really terrible leg cramps. I would go out to my pool at 2:00 in the morning and just sit by the edge of the pool and put my legs in the water to the cold really seemed to help.
You have a beautiful head of hair today, but what happened to your hair?
Yeah, about 2 weeks. So I went to a family reunion, I think about 2 weeks after my first treatment, and my hair started falling out that weekend in pretty much in clumps. So that Monday when I got back, I had it shaved off. And my husband was still away. No, he wasn't. Yes, he was still away. Anyway, I've lost track of he was just coming back that week, and that was really hard. It was really hard. I got fitted for a wig, but I never wore it because it just wasn't. And I was told, just get a big pair of earrings, and it was summer, late summer. So I never went bald in public. I didn't have the nerve to do that, but I did wear scarves. I wore scarves right up until, so my hair started after the 6 treatments, which went up just beyond Thanksgiving. I was, completely hairless, and I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
I'll help you out a bit. So what I think I heard you say was that Peter should get a big pair of earrings, and my going bald in public is very courageous. Sorry, that wasn't your story.
Sean, you're really courageous.
Yeah, I don't know that the earrings would really help.
I did want to go back to something I heard you say a second ago that's more in the serious space, though, is you talked about early on that you, in a sense, said, hey, I'm okay here by myself in that first few days, and then you recognized that you were wrong about that later on. And then you talked about that the way you got through this journey was the fact that you had such great support around you. That's the theme of what I'm hearing in the conversation this morning, is that your support group and the people that were there and that journeyed along with you spiritually and also in the physical healing space that took you to treatments, to be there, even the team at the hospital, that was such an important part of your journey. The type of care you received, the quality of care, all those things played into part of your journey of peace, is having that support, which is fascinating, since at the start you were kind of just, I don't need that. I'm because you are an independent, self-made kind of woman who has the ability to provide for herself. But that's not what the cancer journey is about, is what I really hear you saying.
Well, this is where you have to be able to receive the help.
Yeah.
And before I got into recovery, discipleship, deep discipleship, I had this wall around me. I didn't trust people. I had been hurt, and I had hurt other people, but those were all very unresolved. And the self-blame, always feeling like everything was my fault, would have kicked in big time. That this is such a big disappointment to other people. And I wouldn't have been able. The fact that I had been in what we call our forever family, and allowing myself to be vulnerable and developing those relationships and allowing myself to really be known, and to accept help, was really huge going into this journey, because I really would have white knuckled it through this thing, and I would not have been. It wouldn't have been pretty, especially with my husband, because recovery saved our marriage. I don't have time to get into that right here, but we learned how to communicate. We were both ended up getting involved in Celebrate Recovery, and we had become, after having had a really difficult time in around 2012, where I wasn't sure that we were going to be able to survive as a married couple. We had learned how to communicate, and because we'd both gotten a lot of healing in the program, and so that had made all the difference in our marriage and our family. Having had our son had difficulties, and we were able to kind of deal with those together, whereas we'd been kind of coming at it from opposite ends before. So the cancer journey just looked a whole lot different because of that for us.
At 70, this wasn't your first dark night of the soul, but it was an important one that you've walked through a bit. And so I was thinking about your journey, and you talked about some of the family struggle, and that was just maybe even the 10 years prior. It sounds like, that's kind of the time frame, and then a new dark night of the soul comes. And I think that's kind of the way life is that God draws you into another dark night to grow you, disciple you, as you're using the language that you put out there, which is really fascinating to me. And so I was thinking about the things, what did you learn this? I know that piece about, because I heard you talk about self-care was such an important thing, and that's not something you would normally do. So that's something that's on your list. And I was really thinking about, what does your family life look like this time, in this dark night of the soul, at this point? Because a lot of healing had taken place from your prior experiences. What did family mean to your recovery journey? What did it look like? What are the things that you would say to somebody who's walking through this, and maybe even somebody who's listening to this who's a family member, and their family members going through the dark night of the soul of a cancer journey? What's helpful?
I think what was really, of course, I worried about the other members of my family and how they were dealing with this, but it wasn't my job to try to make that better. But recognizing it, recognizing that my husband was facing possibly losing his wife, and that was hurtful to him. I mean, honestly, before, I'm not sure that I would have thought that way. I mean, my kids, everybody has their own way of dealing with pain, with grief, and they have to kind of do that. They have to kind of figure that out, because God has a purpose for each person, and we can't do that for them. I reckon, and everybody has a different way of responding, and just recognizing that it is what it is for them. And because I'm codependent and wanting to fix people, or feeling responsible for their happiness, focusing on myself was just really important. But also recognizing yeah, this is a shock to the system. It's a shock to the sort of the family dynamics. Um, they were great. They were great. They were wonderful. They did everybody did what they could, and being supportive. My husband was very supportive of me and very concerned. And I tell you, we were moving in the midst of all of this. We moved our 24-year-long, household of raising kids, and you know how much junk there is involved in having raised kids, and moving households, 20 minutes, half an hour away, but still a move is a move, and we were going through that. I think I was in the middle of my treatments when we actually had to actually move at the end of September. And I underestimated the size of that, and so did my husband, and the impact that in typical fashion. I'm like, oh yeah, I can handle that. I was the one managing the movers coming and packing up our stuff, and that was horrible. That was just really awful. It was very stressful, and my husband has his own business, so it was hard for him to get away from that. So, but we got through it.
We're getting close to the end of our time now, so I
gosh.
want to kind of get to like final thoughts that you think would be important, and maybe Peter, if you have a question that might make sense too from your experience. But what are some things you want to leave from your experience? You completed your treatments. You today are in a place where you're cancer free. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
you're living life as somebody who is acting. You had this thing in the past that's there, and probably always something in the back of your mind is going to come back or something like that. Because I know you talk about this is like as you going to be tested. There's that. Peter talks about it regularly. I'm going for tests, and he doesn't know what he's going to find. I'm sure those are things that are going through your mind. But what are some things that you feel would be great to share? In the closing out of this podcast,
Well,
time's gone fast, but
gratitude. I'm just really grateful for the people that have been around me, for Peter and his guidance and just care and just everything that he's doing and that he came alongside me. Where he's you're like a brother to me. You both are, but this was just really amazing. Gratitude for the treatment that I have available to me, because not everybody has that really top. Now there's a lot of talk about. Well, anyways, I kind of want to say people talk about alternative medicines and that kind of thing, and everything, but and the side effects have been difficult. I do have ongoing neuropathy, but which is numbness in my feet and legs and muscle cramps. But it's pretty much under control with medication. But it's not getting better, and that's frustrating. But and other than that, I feel great, and I am kind of back to my kind of normal self. But it did take it took its toll, and I feel a lot older. Actually, I feel my age. I always felt younger than my age, and so that's kind of a bummer. But I think it's just really important that my faith, because life is just continues to be challenging, and it's not. Yes, I get this scanxiety every 6 months,
it's a good word.
but
Not a
then
good word, but
there's a great relief, when it's over, and they say, nope, didn't find any, but that doesn't mean it's not there. So I just, yeah, I'm just really grateful to be where I am today in that regard.
Mm.
all right. Well,
Yeah.
Katharin, I hear a theme, and I want to put it out there and see if you would agree with this. But it was the theme I hear from today. Your kind of, I'll call it the journey is support, and starting with God's support, supporting yourself. You really talked about self-care quite a bit, and I think sometimes somebody can think self-care sounds like selfish and navel gazing, and I want to say that's not what you were talking about. What you were talking about was the need to learn how to care for this gift that God gave you, your body. And even there's a level of humility in allowing others to care for you. And I heard in what you shared is that you got to that point of humility that you let other people care for you. And I think that's probably really important because I listened to your story, Peter, and without other people coming alongside of my own recovery journey, without other people coming alongside me, I wouldn't have had the courage to go forward in so many places. And so you're sharing with Peter's, there was a support group and your family and so many of your friends around you that's gave you great hope. But even having the hope of being a grandparent, your granddaughter being there, she didn't have to say anything. The presence of life next to you brought hope as you continue the journey. And you're on the backside of this journey right now, that current where you're cancer free, and there's life on the other side too. But your peace isn't in the next scan. What I hear is your peace is you have a deep faith and a support group, a community around you. That's the theme I hear from your testimony, and you. I see you nodding your head, so in agreement.
Absolutely.
So
I just want to add to that. I know Katharin's spirituality, and she was in the church for a long time, and then Dark Nights of the Soul brought her into the discipleship / recovery program. And I think I heard you say, Katharin, that you really benefited from being vulnerable and honest in this journey with others and with yourself. And I think that that's huge. That's one piece that we're trying to get out there, is that it's okay to be honest and vulnerable and to process your emotions, and that's how God speaks to us a lot of times. So
Well, it's okay not to be okay.
it's okay not to be okay.
You know, I
love
can
it.
show
Yeah.
up and be a mess, and
Yep.
and even I had to share that the other day at our CR because I just had come up against something that just kind of set me back and made me and really triggered some of those old feelings. And I just had to be honest and say, yeah, I'm back at step 1 with this particular area, and I'm at 12 in some others, so.
tell people how long this is something I think it's helpful to know, because you've been a state rep for recovery in Connecticut for several years now. And when did your recovery discipleship journey begin? Because the reason why we're able to sit here and even talk about character, like minimizing people, even realizing that, hey, that's something that I might struggle with, is part of a deeper journey. Because most of us have no idea that we have certain character defects till we go through a much stronger form of discipleship where we're examining, where we're actually looking at our life and where it comes from. How long has that journey been for you?
2014 was when it started. So 9 years, a little over 9 years, because actually that was when it started at Walnut Hill, but I was involved in Al-Anon before that.
Really cool. Yeah. And that's, to me, has been such an important part of your journey, is that you had something that you could put as a foundation point. Because can you imagine what approaching this journey, this Dark Night of the Soul, had been if you didn't have all that work of emotional health and deep inner work where you could actually see yourself and know your needs at a greater level. And so I think that's an important part of this piece, that you're
Definitely.
sitting here, because I hear somebody who this came their way and you had tools in place already.
Right.
And I wonder how many people are going to be getting a cancer diagnosis, and they don't have a 9-year journey ahead, that they've already been on, or at that time, maybe, I guess, 6 or 7 year journey that is ahead, that's already there. And part of the starting point is to let this be a tool to kick you into doing what I would call the inner journey work, what you were defining as discipleship. And it's something that's deeply meaningful for our journeys in finding peace.
Yeah. Katharin, we take the 12-step beatitude process and apply it to the cancer journey. So that sense of being powerless over, and then, I need a higher power. And for us, it's Jesus Christ, and turning my life and will over to that higher power. Then the inventory piece, which talks about delving into my emotional life and my brokenness, all that, so we kind of use that. I think that was the one of the main reasons for the podcast. Sean is a fellow recovery brother of mine, and I've had so much benefit in doing the inner journey along with the cancer journey. And so dovetail.
But I have to say, though, that because of the structure of the recovery program that we've been in, including the guidelines, helped me to focus on myself, to learn to listen, to not try to fix, to keep confidences, and to, well, watch my language. That's the last guideline, but I'm not successful with that
one. We won't ask what words you use.
But I think that was a really important part, because it's not just it is the inner journey, but it's also the outer journey. Peace with God, peace with ourselves, and peace with others. And in order to do that, I had to have those guidelines in place, because I was a fixer. I still have trouble with interrupting people, because I'm impulsive. I have ADD, so I have to say it or I'm going to forget. Crosstalk, all that kind of stuff. Those became learning to listen, and listen like Sean has been doing. He really, you model that really well, because you said what I'm hearing, and that's active listening. And I was not really I'm still not that great a listener, but I'm learning.
I want to say I've been involved in recovery for several years with you, and the amount of growth and who I see, the woman that you are today, and the leader, because that was what was interesting, is that I think when you were early in your recovery years, you weren't in a position to lead in a real way, and now you're, and you have been the state rep for Connecticut for a lot of years. 7 years, leading well, leading strong with integrity and courage. And so courage, sitting here today, sharing your journey even. And so, and always willing to share your life. And so, Katharin, I want to say thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
And sharing
really
your life
pleasure.
And your story.
It's just my pleasure. Thank you for listening.
It's our pleasure to have you.
So that's going to be a wrap for today's episode of Cancer and Peace. And if you want to get more resources, go to cancerandpeace.com. Peter has his book and a lot of other resources. And we're excited that you joined us. So thanks, Peter. Thanks, Katharin.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Both of you. Appreciate it.